don't think migrants think that far ahead. They're not going to think in 10 years, am I going to get a passport of this country or not? And once again, how is that going to stop actually people coming here? People do not, they're not planning that ahead. If people want to cross the channel to get into the UK, they want to get into the UK by any means
By any means,
possible.
yeah. Let's spend a bit of time focusing on the Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood's new immigration reforms, which were announced this week. And she describes them as the only alternative to the fairy tales of open borders. Now, the changes include an end to permanent refugee status. So people would have to sort of reapply to stay in this country every few years. And if the country that they'd come from was deemed to be safe, they would have to go back there. The other very controversial proposal was offering families of asylum seekers up to £40,000 to return to their home country or face deportation. Now, it's really split the critics, this set of proposals. Some have really applauded the Home Secretary for taking decisive action, and indeed some sort of more on the right of politics have said, it's good that she's looking at this stuff seriously. But others have been very negative, particularly on the left of politics. There's some Labour backbenchers who are very worried about that. Some people have drawn negative comparisons, saying this all feels a bit like ICE, it all feels like Donald Trump. And we spoke to Ruth Jones yesterday, who's a Welsh Labour MP, and she had signed a letter, and there's more than 100 Labour MPs that have signed this letter, saying that the proposals undermine the government's integration and social cohesion, and we're expecting some kind of announcement on social cohesion next week. Well, let's now try and actually dissect some of these policies, and I'm delighted to be joined by an expert panel. We have Danny Shaw, who's a former Home Office advisor and a sort of crime and policing and Home Office commentator. Hello, Danny.
Good evening, Ayesha. Nice to be with you.
Well, it's always great to have you on. Welcome to the show, Dr. Mihnea Cuibus, who is a researcher at the Oxford Migration Observatory. Mihnea, welcome to the show.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
And welcome to the show, Harjap Singh Bhangal, who is an immigration lawyer. Harjap, good evening. Welcome.
Good evening, Ayesha.
Right. So let's kind of try and unpack some of these proposals. I'll start with you, Mihnea. How do you think this is going to make an impact in terms of people coming to this country?
So I think it depends which part of these reforms we're talking about specifically. Of course, we've seen a myriad reforms being announced by the Home Secretary both this week and more generally in the last 3 or 4 months, focusing on the biggest announcement this week, and that's the fact that starting on Monday, refugee status is now temporary. So people are going to get status for 30 months, have to renew it every 30 months, depending on home country conditions. Right now, the system allows people recognized as refugees to get status for 5 years, then immediately apply for asylum. Now, the Home Secretary's hope is going to be that this is going to deter asylum seekers from coming to the UK, including, but not only people coming over the English Channel by small boats. The answer to is this going to work, is we don't know. So that we don't have a lot of evidence on the differences between temporary and permanent status. There's only one other country in Europe that has a system similar to the new one, the one that inspired it, and that's Denmark. Now, in Denmark, we've seen a significant decline in asylum applications over the last 10 years, down to a 40-year low. But exactly how much of that decline is due to this shift to a temporary model of asylum, and whether any kind of effect will be similar in the quite different context of the UK, a lot of that depends on implementation, and we're going to have to hear a lot more details in the coming years about how the Home Office is going to implement it.
And Danny, on this particular proposal about people having to reapply every couple of years, I mean, I've heard people who are supportive of it saying, look, if the country from which you came is now stable, then it is right that you go back. And they've argued that there's a pull factor, which seems if you can just get to these shores, then because the system is so dysfunctional, you're going to be here for a very, very long time. That's the view I've heard. But others who are critics of this, Stella Creasy, Ruth Jones, other MPs, Tony Vaughan, Labour MPs have said, actually, this will be it's unfair on people because they can't really settle, they can't really integrate themselves into British life if they're constantly thinking, well, we might have to go home. That's quite unsettling for people. But also they have said that this will be quite costly and quite bureaucratic for the Home Office to actually execute this. What are your thoughts, Danny?
I think all of that is true to some extent. I don't think that the government or Shabana Mahmood would really want to do this particularly, but at the moment the numbers are such that some radical steps have to be taken to make it easier to remove people from the UK if and when their country is deemed to be safe. So at the moment, if they're given refugee status, they get that for 5 years and then they can settle. So I think halving that to 2.5 years with a regular review is a kind of, I think, a proportionate step to take, together with some of the other measures around raising the standard of English that refugees are going to be expected to reach to sort of A-level standard for foreign for a second language. Do I think it will deter people? Frankly, I don't. I don't think it will make a difference to anyone who's in northern France thinking about trying to get to the UK. Oh, my claim is going to be reviewed in 2.5 years if I get. I just don't think that's going to make a difference.
And why is that? Is that because you think people think, well, I'll still have 2.5 years there, and probably when I'm there I won't be able to be sent back?
I just don't think they're weighing stuff up like that. Right. I really don't. What they're thinking is once I'm on British soil, my asylum claim is going to be looked at and examined. There will be at least a chance that I'll be allowed to stay for some time, and then perhaps I can put down roots, I can get a job, and so on. And so I don't think it's going to act as a deterrent, certainly not in any significant numbers whatsoever. Will it make it easier for the Home Office to remove some people after 2.5 years and say, look, your country is safe now, you can go back? Yes, it probably will. But I think we're talking about marginal differences here. And I am worried about the bureaucracy involved every 2.5 years, but having to review all those cases.
And Harjap, from your perspective as an immigration lawyer, what do you think about this this proposal?
I think we have to look where this all comes from, and this is all comes from the trying to lure voters and public opinion at the moment. And if public opinion is, well, the numbers are too high and we need to get our borders under control, then that's what the government has to deliver. So the government is looking in a voting sort of way to not lose votes to the Greens and not lose votes to Reform. So it has to balance. And it's a whole mixed pot of policies here, which will affect a lot of industries. But in relation to asylum seekers, we're missing the key point here. And how is this going to affect the people smugglers? The people smugglers are making the profit. There's more money made in people smuggling than there is in drug smuggling. That's a fact. So this organized mafia, who are always 20 steps ahead of any government, how is any of these laws going to stop them selling the product of you have to get into the UK in order to claim asylum? The only way to claim asylum in the UK is if you set foot in that country. We are the only people who can get you there. Here is our product. If you want to get to the UK and get to safety or join your family, you have to use our services and cross on a small boat or on a lorry, etc., etc. This, I don't see having. So
you don't think this sort of having to reapply to have a sort of refugee status will deter people? You don't think it will stop people coming?
Well, no, I don't think it will stop. We have a limited leave to remain program at the moment, and that's renewable every 2.5 years, which leads to settlement after 10 years. That's for people who've come here illegally or overstayed and then had children here subsequently. The kids have hit 7, or they've had children with British partners and they've become parents of British children. So that system's already in place. And I agree with Danny. I don't think migrants think that far ahead. They're not going to think in 10 years, am I going to get a passport of this country or not? And once again, how is that going to stop actually people coming here? They're not planning that ahead. If people want to cross the channel to get into the UK, they want to get into the UK by any means possible.
Yeah. And I think that's...
And this might deter them.
Yeah, I think that's the thing we sort of. I mean, look, this is very, very difficult. It's a very, very difficult thing to stop. But I think sometimes what we don't understand, or we don't fully factor in when we're having these we're trying to have rational conversations about this, is that these people will literally just do anything to get across the channel, just to get, a foot on British soil, because as soon as they get here, they think, I'm here for whatever that reason. It's a very powerful emotional motivator, and that's very strong. Well, look, we've got plenty more to discuss with our expert panel. Welcome back. We're having a discussion about Shabana Mahmood's plans on asylum seekers and general immigration. We have Danny Shaw, former Home Office advisor. We have Dr. Mihnea Cuibus, who's a researcher at the Oxford Migration Observatory, and we have Harjap Singh Bhangal, who is a immigration lawyer, and we've just been discussing one of the proposals, which was to not give permanent refugee status to people, make them reapply. And all our guests were sort of saying that it's very difficult to know if this will actually move the needle. Let's have a look at another policy that got a lot of headlines, Mihnea, and this was the idea of paying families quite a large amount of money, seems to most people, to leave. Shabana Mahmood's come under quite a lot of fire from this. She's defended it, saying, well, actually will cost more money to the state and to the taxpayer just to keep families here indefinitely. But it seems to have jarred a lot with people, particularly who are struggling at the moment, saying that just does feel manifestly unfair. What do you think about that proposal, and how does it compare with what other countries do?
So the idea of paying people to leave voluntarily, that's not a new idea. The UK has had voluntary payments for returns of up to £3,000 for more than a decade, introduced by the previous government. Other countries have similar payments. So there's nothing unusual in having a payment as high as £10,000 per person or up to £40,000 per family. That's the important step, raising that amount by quite a substantial amount, trying to push some people who maybe otherwise wouldn't leave to actually take the offer and do so in a short period of time. It is true, as the Home Secretary was saying, the alternatives tend to be quite a bit more expensive than even these large sums of money. Keeping an individual in an asylum hotel, as it often happens in these situations, that costs up to £120 a day per person. So you can see how for a family of four that adds up very quickly. The other alternative, pushing people, deporting people forcibly against their desire, that requires escorts, that requires expensive charter flights. So whatever those alternatives are, the costs pile up quite rapidly. So in many ways, this does seem to try to be, at least in theory, a cost-saving measure.
Suzanne's messaging saying 40k is more than an average annual salary even in London. And Danny, the problem with this is, even as Mihnea has just explained, that the long-term costs can be way more than 40,000, but just that figure of 40,000 just seems like a lot to people. It's quite a difficult one to sell, isn't it?
Of course, it's a difficult sell, and you will have seen some of the headlines over the past few days about it. But the reality is you have to take some of these tough decisions. And if you want to save money in the long run, then that's the way to do it, is to offer incentives for people to go if they've exhausted all their.
But what if they go and then they come back,
here.
Danny? Because that's happened with the one in, one out.
Look, I suppose it's possible someone could go and they'll come back, but they'll be immediately checked at the border now through fingerprints and biometrics, and they would just be removed again. And that's what's happened with the one in, one out deal. A few people, I think 2 or 3 people, have come back, but they've been removed again. Look, it's a necessary step that I think you have to take. I think that Shabana Mahmood has framed this very carefully and politically quite astutely in her speech, talking about, we can't be more green and we can't be more reform. We've got to go through the middle. Rights flow from responsibilities. We've got to be more labour, fair but firm, compassion and control. I think she's framed it very well, these changes. And I think she's absolutely right. The alternative, frankly, if you go to the right, is not bear thinking about. A reform government, in my view, would be 10 times worse. So I would urge people to look at the measures carefully and sort of get behind them, because the system is not in control at the moment. It's dysfunctional. And this is a way in which the government is trying to get some measure of control back.
Okay. A few messages coming in. Actually, quite a few people are messaging in with the same message saying, give me £40,000 and I will leave the UK and promise never to come back. Will says, can we not give 40k to rough sleepers? Tom says, why can't we save money by using a deterrent? Harjap, I mean, this is the thing. I mean, look, Danny, I mean, I'm sympathetic to the arguments that Danny makes, and I'm, full disclosure, I'm quite sympathetic to the argument that Shabana Mahmood makes, saying that, look, I think Labour has to chart a kind of a sort of central position, which is neither kind of open borders, nor is it very sort of extreme, but the sell is going to be difficult for people. As an immigration lawyer, do you think your clients would want to come to the UK? Would that be a pull factor for people coming, to say that you could, most likely stay, but you could get £40,000 to leave? That's a huge amount of money for people.
I think it's important for people to realise, first of all, the schematics of the scheme. It's not going to be you give someone a 40 grand check and say, right, you leave, or 40,000 bank transfer, a one-off, and you leave. How these schemes work are the devil in the detail. Now, I understand the questions asked, but now give me 40 grand and I leave the UK, or give it to our rough sleepers. This is how the scheme works. What happens is they drip feed it to the migrants. So they'll give an initial amount of maybe, say, £1,000 or £2,000, including tickets, for the person to leave. Then every few months, they'll make sure that the person is still there. And then they'll drip feed them the next instalment and the next instalment. It's more of a resettlement grant to make sure they're resettled. It's not that someone will take 40,000 and then the next week they'll use that and they'll pay 20,000 to come back over again, bagging a 20,000.
So they're not going to get a big.
I think that's important.
They're not going to get a Brucey bonus, big golden check. Okay, that's important. That is a good. That's a good thing to know. It's not like winning the lottery.
It's not a bullseye prize.
But
so this is how it's going to work.
But how do you think that would be enough to persuade people to, like, people you've represented? Would that resettlement fund, and the way it's sort of, drip fed out to people, do you think that would be enough of an incentive for people to go to another country?
Well, if we look at the figures from last year, in the amount of people who left the UK, 28,000 people left, people without visas or right to remain here, or refused asylum seekers, left voluntarily. So that's under the 3,000 scheme, or less, or even without taking a penny. Now, 28,000 people a year are already leaving the UK voluntarily, whether they've been here 10 years, 5 years, 10 months, they're fed up and they think, you know what, I'd rather go back. That's without the 40,000 incentive. This can only increase that. It's not really going to decrease that. And remember, parties like Reform and a lot of Reform supporters say, well, we don't want to pay them a penny. A few months ago, Nigel Farage himself, in their policy, which is not documented, actually said we would pay them up to 5,000 to leave instead of the 3,000 given by the government. So this can only add to those figures of people going back. I don't see how it will decline in that. Whether it will be in the big numbers that perhaps is mooted about, or people want it to be, I doubt it, because it only initially targets 100 to 150 families, and they're targeting those families where there's 6 members, 7 members being housed in hotels where it would cost over 100,000 normally to house them for a year anyway. So I can only see the numbers going up. I can't see them going down. And remember, it is a drip-fed payment, so it won't be those people will be using that 40,000 to come back in. It's a resettlement grant in itself.
Okay.
So I think that's where we're at, and it's a case of maths essentially.
Okay. Well, a couple of people messaged in just saying, being very clear that people aren't going to get a £40,000 in one go, and Harjap, you've done a good job of that. But a lot of people are sceptical, saying that this will be a deterrent. They think that it may be proved to be an incentive to come to the UK. Although from what we're hearing, people want to come to the UK anyway. And I just wonder if, again, what we're seeing in the Middle East, is that going to further exacerbate the number of people that want to come here on small boats? It's worth saying that if you look at the top countries, in terms of, people in small boats. It is quite a lot of people, places from the Middle East, like Iran is like number 3, for example. So this is a huge problem. I'm absolutely not denying this is a problem. I think this is terrible, the number of people coming over. It is a very, very difficult problem to crack. But it was a really interesting and informed conversation. My huge thanks to Danny Shaw, to Dr. Mihnea Cuibus, and to Harjap Singh Bhangal there.